Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It was desired by the Amir Sahib Tanzania that as they are holding an annual conference of Jamaat Ahmadiyya Tanzania beginning this day, I should address that conference myself. Perhaps they wanted to be the opening address, but whatever the nature of this address be, I have found a few moments out of my very busy schedule to participate in your conference directly from London. East African soil is the first in the history of the continent of Africa to have hosted Ahmadiyyat even before the turn of this century. The memories of some devout companions of Hazrat Masih Maud Wasalam who went to Africa for the sake of some services, which was not, and they were not sent particularly to spread the message of Ahmadiyyat there. Because they were very devout, dedicated, they were dedicated to the task of Dawat al-Allah, that is the invitation to the path of Allah, so much that it was impossible to separate their profession from the occupation. The profession and the occupation. By the profession I meant they had different professions, like some were doctors, some were engineers, some were employed in the army at different posts. This was their profession. But their occupation was the spread of Ahmadiyyat, the preaching of Ahmadiyyat. This is what possessed them, day and night. And I've heard true stories of some of them spending most of the hours of their 24-hour day in preaching, and they did it with such spirit and such zeal that that seemed to be the very purpose of their life, and it was the purpose of their life, in fact. As such, Ahmadiyyat got rooted in Africa, on the East African soil, and it flourished to a degree in those days, in those early years, and continued to flourish for a while later on. But most unfortunately, the early Ahmadis were not from the African stock. That was an exception. Most of the conversions took place from among the immigrants from India and also later on which became Pakistan, the entire subcontinent India, and rarely from some other places, but mostly they belong to the Indian subcontinent. It astounds me to imagine how they remained limited in their message to the people of the subcontinent regions, the people of the subcontinent origin, and Africans, if they accepted Ahmadiyyat, were very few and far between. This was a great mistake, in my opinion. And this is the blunder, I should say, which cost Ahmadiyyat dearly in East Africa. Although Ahmadiyyat went much later to the West Africa, but because right from the beginning, the sons of the soil were the prime target of address, and they responded so wonderfully, so open-heartedly, despite some bitter oppositions. In the final analysis, West Africans accepted Ahmadiyyat at a much greater pace than what happened in East Africa. There, although, as I have already mentioned, Ahmadiyyat was accepted by quite a few members of that society, but it did not belong originally to the African soil. They were immigrants. Then followed a long history of involvements of Ahmadis in with non-Ahmadi hostile mullahs, which repeatedly came from India to arrest the growth of Ahmadiyyat among the people of Indian origin in East Africa. So like they come now in London, they reach London nowadays, fearing that if Ahmadiyyat was left alone, Ahmadiyyat would spread very fast among the people of England. This is their profession as well as their obsession. They can't live without opposing the path of Ahmadiyyat. So in those early days I'm talking about, when they heard that people from the subcontinent living in East Africa were accepting Ahmadiyyat, they made repeated calls, and many of them were past masters in invectives and foul language. So they created halla-gulla and noise, but Ahmadi scholars always remain within the limits of decency and logic. So despite all their efforts, Ahmadiyyat continued to spread, though a bit less fast, a bit more slowly, I should say. But because the involvement was within the community from India, everybody seems to have forgotten that they were foreigners there. The country belonged to Africans. And without converting the Africans, Ahmadiyyat could not even boast of having got rooted there, truly in the real sense of the word. It is this problem which I inherited myself. And I'm absolutely disappointed to discover that this mutual involvement did not permit them to look around to the people of the country to whom the country belonged, and they were left almost untouched. Of course, there were a few conversions from among them, but until the day I'm talking about, when I was great Khalifa, when I examined the situation and explored all the possible avenues of preaching, I found stuck with the problem that there were very few Africans who could be used to convey the message to their own brothers, and as such there was more likelihood of Ahmadiyya to be accepted by them, because if the people, sons of the soil, the children of the country, themselves take up the cudgel for the sake of a message, it is more likely to be accepted. But about Tanzania, I must say that it fared better in comparison with Kenya. When I visited East Africa, so far I was talking of the whole of East African soil. But when I visited there for the first time, I was happily surprised to see that in Tanzania the situation was not as bad as it was in Kenya and Uganda, particularly in Kenya. For whatever reasons it happened, I don't know, but in Tanzania, after the expulsion of the foreigners from the country, still there was a sizable African Jamaat of Ahmadis who were small in number, but still they existed, and they sometimes also occupied positions of importance. So I particularly address the Murabbi, who is also the missionary in charge, who is also at present the missionary in charge, fortunately, to utilize this manpower, the Ahmadiyya manpower, the African Ahmadiyya manpower, to fasten this, to hasten the speed of the spread of the message. And with the grace of Allah, this missionary is very responsible and very industrious as well as dedicated to the cause of Ahmadiyyat. And he, I have found, has always worked under any conditions, any difficulties, without any complaints, without any, you know, sense of being deprived of this facility or that facility. I never heard any complaint from him about anything. And one thing about one other thing which I noticed about him was that whenever I instructed that you should follow this plan of action, he did not think that he could think better, and he did not interfere with that plan of action which I had devised, and he followed it meticulously. So as such, I found that his work was rewarded much more and much better than in some other places in East Africa. And the figures speak for themselves, which I have brought here to be shared with you. For the last few years, when this special attention was paid to East Africa, let's say a comparison of the figures before 3 years and after, during the 3 years. In the previous 3 years, during the past 3 years, the East African Jamaats have spread from 115 to 140. It's a very rapid progress. In 140 new places, Ahmadiyyat has got rooted. Not new places. In just a moment, let me reconcile. Yes. Prior to the 3 years, past 3 years, the total number of places where Jamaat had got rooted was 115. During the 3 past years, 140 new places have been added on to that. It's indeed a great achievement, mashallah. 8 new mosques have been built during the last 3 years. 15 new muballighin, that is the missionaries, have been added to the team of the missionaries prior to 3 years under review. As far as the baths are concerned, never to my memory had Tanzania exceeded the figure of 500 in the period prior to the 3 years we are talking about. Up to 1993, this was the situation. The maximum they could boast of was in the vicinity of 500, without reaching 500. When we paid special attention to this most important task of spreading rapidly among the Africans, in 94 the figure rose to 7,500 in 1 year. It's very encouraging. But I said it's too small. Why don't you look at your brothers in West Africa, where they have crossed the barriers of 100,000 and are now, mashallah, leaping forward in figures of 200,000, 300,000 and so on and so forth. So with the grace of Allah, they responded honestly and to the best of their capacity. So in the next year, 95, the number of baths in 1 year rose from 7,500 to 21,000, mashallah. And I was very happy, but I didn't tell them that I was so happy. I said, just that is not sufficient. I want you to go faster and faster until you match your speed with the rest of the African brothers. So this year, 96, mashallah, has resulted in 30,235 baths. A figure of 1 year which outnumbers the baths obtained during the previous 100 years and more. So this is an example of how Allah helps people who help themselves with all honesty and integrity. You had this potential all the time. You wasted it, unfortunately. And you have some more potential, I know. So inshallah, this year I'm expecting you to double this number of 30, if not to 100,000, at least to 60,000 some. So if you include among the workers all the new converts, 30,000 of 96, 21,000 of 95, 7,500 of the previous year, and even if you forget about the 500s of the previous many years, you have a very strong army of Ahmadi workers who, if properly trained and charged, can conquer East Africa in leaps and bounds with the grace of Allah, spiritually of course. For that you are reminded to have training centers among particularly the new converts, and they should not be left alone to shift for themselves, left to chance. There should be an organized plan to absorb them, to assimilate them into the Ahmadiyya system, because converts are not familiar with the new teachings they accept. Although as far as the fundamentals are concerned, they learn of them and they agree with them and they become Ahmadis. But it's not just the fundamentals, it's the whole edifice of the Ahmadiyya teachings and ways of life and practices and customs which have to be taught to them. So, first priority which I want you to pay attention to is to open small training classes in schools everywhere among the new converts. The new converts, by the new converts I mean the converts of the first 3 years. And produce first the teams of teachers from among them. Don't demand for new missionaries, because the work of Ahmadiyyat is spreading much faster than in your country, everywhere. So how can we produce new missionaries by any magic? It's impossible. They would take their time. Of course they are being produced. The rate is increased, but the pace of the spread of Ahmadiyyat is much faster than the rate at which the missionaries can ever be produced. So follow the sunnah of Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the instruction of the Holy Quran to meet these emergency requirements. Invite the youth preferably, but also the old people, if they are available, to participate in teaching in courses of Ahmadiyya teachings. If not all of them to the center, then create different centers in easy reach of the new converts, where the year long the class should run. The first class should be aimed at producing teachers rather than students. Produce teachers for the first 2 or 3 months and teach them all the elementary essentials of Ahmadiyyat, which means all the essentials of Islam, of course. They should learn how to say their prayer, they should learn the meaning of the prayer and a few surahs which are often used during the prayers and for recitation. And also they should be taught how to perform the janaza prayer, what are the essential rites of giving bath to the dead and preparing him or her, and the manner in which this should be done, and how the janaza prayer is led, how a newborn baby should be attended, and how the nikah should be performed, and also the daily requirements of Muslim life should be brought into the focus of your attention as far as the teaching of Islam is concerned. The teaching of Islam can never end, it's an unlimited course. But these preliminaries can be attended in the beginning. Teach them all this plus Dawat al-Allah. Teach them how to invite people to the cause of Allah, and teach them the essential prerequisites of preaching. That is the fundamental knowledge in the areas of differences. And also tell them how to approach people, how to befriend them, how to bring them closer to you by all the possible means of winning their hearts. Without winning the hearts, minds cannot be won. So because I have other appointments to attend to, I think for the time being this should be considered sufficient. The advice I have rendered you, adhere to it with complete fidelity. And inshallah you will see that to reach the figure of 100,000 is no longer a far cry from today. You will begin to see that as you extend your hand towards it, it will start coming to you faster than your hand can be extended. So Allah bless you, and with that I bless this opening of your Ijtama, of the annual conference, and I hope this conference has its daughter conferences through the dish antenna facilities, and those who could not come personally, like you, are being spoken to by me directly in the sense that you see me, you watch me, you hear me. So also there will be other Jamaats, I hope, who can watch these programs directly and increase the number of dish antennas as fast as you can. This is highly essential for the survival and the spread of the message there in your country. Allah bless you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.